Welcome to the Filmcast and our review of the new Julius Avery movie, Samaritan. I'm David Chen here with Jeff Kanata and Devindra. I'm going to read the plot summary of Samaritan on IMDb. A young boy learns that a superhero who was thought to have gone missing after an epic battle 20 years ago may in fact still be around. This movie is interesting in a variety of ways, at least on paper. It stars a 70-something-year-old Sylvester Stallone trying to play an ostensible superhero. It is directed by Julius Avery, who made a really fun horror movie called Overlord in 2018.
Nobody's seen. We reviewed it, but not
really
talked
enjoyed.
about very much.
Really great horror movie. Like really loved it, and so obviously interested in what he would do next. But what's also interesting about Samaritan is it's a superhero movie,
quote unquote. I don't know. It's a 90s superhero movie. That's what
exactly.
It is. Yeah.
Drew McWeeny, in his newsletter Formerly Dangerous, was saying, "Oh, Samaritan is a movie that has been on the shelf since 1994." Wait, what's that you say? It's not been on the shelf since 1994. It's actually a new movie. It has learned none of the lessons of any superhero movies over the course of the last few decades, and apparently, by the way, the plot of the movie seems to exist in a world where people don't know about superheroes either, right?
Sure,
Where like they're very rare, which actually made me feel weird as I thought about it, because it's rare to have a movie like this where superheroes are no longer ubiquitous, right? It's weird to have a world in a movie where not everyone's talking about superheroes and knows what they are, because that'd just be
in the 90s. In the 90s, superhero movies buried the superhero. Like the idea was try to minimize the superhero-ness of it as much as possible. That's all backstory stuff that we can show you in the first 2 minutes of the movie. It's not really. It's about superheroes, but it's not really about superheroes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And that all kind of, like, we saw a bit of that with like X-Men. I think it was really Spider-Man that really was like, hey, he's Spider-Man. Deal with it. This is colorful. This is a comic book. Even X-Men, the first X-Men, like, they didn't get the costumes. They had to have cool 90s suits, and even they made fun of that. So
leather, baby.
Yeah.
No masks.
I will say, with all that stuff I just said, with Sylvester Stallone, Julius Avery, like a lot of potential. The guy who played Ashtray, I think, in Euphoria.
So excited to see him do something else.
Javon Walton is in this movie.
Walton.
A lot of like really great talent involved with this movie, and also the fact that it's not taking place in either the DC or Marvel universe, in my opinion, kind of increases the potential for something interesting to happen. It doesn't need to freed from the constraints of needing to be connected to another universe. Surely they would find some interesting story to tell.
You guys didn't see the post-credit sequence when Morbius showed up?
I wish that would have been one of the most
show up in this movie. It would be like Stallone as Judge Dredd or something. Like, this is a movie that fits right alongside Judge Dredd and Demolition Man. Yeah.
So with all that potential, with all the potentials to do interesting things, to have a great director, a legendary actor, Devindra Hardawar, how well do you think this movie succeeds?
Not very well. Not very well at all. I will say, I don't think it's outright terrible. There are things about it that I really like. Stallone it's like impossible for him not to be kind of compelling as a screen presence, especially as like a grizzled old semi-retired superhero. I think the kid, certainly Javon Walton, I love him in Euphoria, but I'm also always worried about him in Euphoria because he's doing crazy things and like around all the, like, it is an environment where I'm like, I just want to protect this kid. So I am kind of glad to see him be in a thing where he can just be a kid, and he's good.
Here's the thing. I mean, I have to say, I think he's a very talented actor, and he's great in Euphoria. Unfortunately, I think he's horribly miscast in this movie.
Maybe
in Euphoria, like Jeff, you haven't seen Euphoria, but basically he plays this kid who has seen a lot of stuff in his life, and
he's the younger brother of a drug dealer. Basically.
Yeah, he's needed to grow up like really fast, basically in Euphoria.
He is a young gangster. Basically.
And that experience and that kind of sensibility is almost literally the opposite of what he needs to play in this movie, which is young, bright-eyed, optimistic, precocious. Like, you're the real superhero, and it's just not where his strengths lie, unfortunately, at this stage of his career, in my opinion.
But it's also like kind of the vibe of the movie. Nothing about the movie is energetic or precocious. I'm thinking about like the kid in the Adam Project, who I hated, who has all that like child actor energy of just he was trying to be a young Ryan Reynolds, so that's actually perfect. Like child actor energy, precocious kid, really plucky and quick with the one-liners. This movie's very weird, right? Like the world of this movie is just like what is it? Is it Grunge City or something?
No, it's I was gonna remember it. Now I can't.
It's nameless
Yeah.
city, basically,
It's
like
like
dirty Philadelphia.
Wow.
This movie, there's no fun in it.
Granite.
I knew it was a
City.
G word.
Granite City.
Granite City.
The most colorful stone we have, granite.
Yeah, couldn't they have chosen like quartz or something? Come on, guys.
This is kind of like a weirdly
Couldn't you have been
ugly
Onyx
movie.
City? Okay, anyway, go ahead.
Onyx, something. It is trying to be gritty, but to me, it just feels like dirty and kind of boring. Like the actual environment of the city, there's really nothing unique to it. It's just city. It's a dirty city. I think the kid is fine. Well, I'll say I liked him because he didn't feel like those typical precocious child actors, and I think he has a sense of screen presence that I think I just enjoy watching. So there's that. But I think this movie fails on almost every level, right? It has a good premise. I'm not a big fan of the opening, which I kind of just really makes it clear what's happening in this movie. I think it opens really poorly. There's not like enough good action, and there's a really cool concept here of like trying to pull a retired superhero, back into work. There's a lot of like Batman. What do you call it? The
Beyond.
old, yeah, beyond like older Bruce Wayne, but kind of trying to pull him back into action. Also having Stallone be one of these characters too. There's so many interesting elements. I feel like this movie doesn't really capitalize on any of it. There's a scene where the villain, who's just like absolutely generic gangster guy, who has a generic group of friends who are his gangster buddies, he does something to kind of like incite the people, the underclass of the city, to follow him, and it's nothing. Like it is a nothing. He blows something up, and everyone's like, "Hey, we should just start looting because this guy says looting is okay." So I'll believe this guy. There's nothing really interesting about that setup, and ultimately, this movie is about a superhero trying to defeat a group of just like dumb gangsters. There's no super villain gangster, right? They're not super powered in any way. It just
there's a weapon that conveys some superpowers.
Yeah.
I guess it never really felt compelling to me. So this movie just feels weirdly poorly made, aside from like some of the roles, and it's interesting early on, but it feels almost too long for what it is. It's not even that long. I just feel like there are so many places where this movie could have veered into something interesting, and it doesn't. It's like completely by the numbers. It does feel like it came straight out of the 90s. My Steel comparison, I saw Steel when I was a kid, and this is just as forgettable as Steel.
I would agree with you that
Yeah.
it does do. There are places where it could theoretically get pretty interesting. One of them is like this idea of people in the city, citizens being dissatisfied and stuff like that, and
massive
worker
unemployment, people who
Yeah.
want to rise up. There's a lot of like Dark Knight Rises here. Yeah,
It feels like there was a lot of stuff that was meant to blunt
Mhm.
this movie in terms of its impact. Like anytime that it tried to do something too interesting, it felt like it was dumbed down a little bit.
Mhm.
Sylvester Stallone's politics are relatively well known at this point. It's possible that originally, there's a large portion of the Fox News watching audience that just thinks like major cities in the U.S. are in ashes right now, right?
Sure.
And it feels like there's this sensibility
if
of
Fox
like
News made a movie set in the city, it would probably look.
it would be like this,
yeah.
right? It would be like this, and it's like it's because of these woke mobs that are like destroying the city. But it doesn't even. That doesn't even have that, and that's not even part of the text,
Mhm.
really. Like,
Mhm.
if it was, at least say what you will about the tenets of Sylvester Stallone, at least it's an ethos. But instead, what we
That
have
doesn't
here
even make any sense. But okay, yes.
instead, what we have here is like a very kind of neutered version of
Mhm.
even whatever that story would be. So,
Mhm.
and then of course there's other developments that I'll talk about in the spoilers that could also have been interesting, but that weren't.
There's
really
a pretty
taken advantage of.
legitimate twist here, which I
Yeah.
think the movie just kind of tell you early on, but
Mm.
also it does nothing with it.
Yes,
Other than one line.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But we'll talk more about that. Anyway, Jeff Kanata, your thoughts on Samaritan?
Well, Dave, my thoughts on Samaritan are best summed up in the form of a limerick.
Told in Stallone voice, I hope.
I am the law. All right, here's my Samaritan limerick. A few moments did make me groan, and the story beats are all well known. but I lived through the 80s, so I'm not going to hate these throwbacks to old school Stallone.
Wow.
I don't really disagree with anything that Devindra said, especially the part where he said it's not awful. It's not an awful movie.
It's not awful.
It's fine.
In the 90s, this is what we had to live with.
This is the best we got. We would have been like, oh, amazing, a superhero movie. Yeah, it is nothing special, entirely forgettable, immediately forgettable, and yet I love watching Sylvester Stallone on the big screen, man.
Mm-hmm.
I love watching some. I mean, this is a smaller screen than big. It was big in my house, but I love watching him. The dude. I mean, this is basically Rocky Balboa meets Unbreakable, right?
Sure.
It's the guy who begrudgingly with his hood on, begrudgingly is a superhero, and like the young kid who wants to get trained, finds him and pulls him out of retirement. It is all those tropes we've seen a million times. There's nothing unique or interesting about this movie, and you're right, Devindra, 100% predictable. Like in the first 5 minutes, I'm like, well, know where that's going.
He is a superhero who drives a garbage truck. I haven't seen that before. So that's his super vehicle, apparently.
That's true.
Yeah.
You clearly haven't seen Men at Work, which
that's
I argue is a superhero movie.
A better movie. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it is entirely forgettable. There's not a single action sequence that's thrilling. There's not. There's nothing that is awesome. I actually did like the first 2 minutes where they kind of give you the entire backstory because it's done in this very stylized comic booky way.
Book style. Sure. I like it. I like the.
I thought it was cool. But really, that's the last visual thing in the entire movie that's interesting or has
the last bit of color you'll see in this movie. Yeah,
true. And really, the only thing that makes this movie watchable, I think, is just the inherent movie stardom of Sylvester Stallone and seeing him just kind of mosey his way through. I mean, I will get to it more in spoilers, but the rules of his superhero-dom don't even make any sense at all. There's no, and I'm very ticked at that. But somehow I sat through this movie and was like, that wasn't bad. I mean, in the days of Demolition Man, I know you guys are going to probably say I'm being, whatever, transgressive, saying that the Demolition Man isn't that great of a movie. We just rewatched it recently.
Yeah, I don't think it's that great of a movie.
It's not that different from this in a lot of ways. I mean, it's a little more interesting because you go to the future, but like those movies, those big, successful action movies of the late 80s and early 90s, that's what this movie is. And so I guess I'm sort of inured to that, and I just accept it. It's like, it feels like a throwback Stallone movie. And in that sense, I was like, it's watchable. It's not.
But we remember those movies fondly through nostalgia, right? If you saw those movies for the first time now, you'd be like, why am I wasting time with this? I have so many other things to watch. Or like, there's so much else going on in the superhero world and in so many other things, other types of movies I could be watching instead.
I agree.
I'm trying to pin down kind of what are the aspects of modern superhero films that are better than movies like this, because we all think it's a throwback, right? I mean, and I identified a few of them, which is no connection to any other universe, right? Like it's just telling its own story and it's self-contained in that way.
But that's not. I don't think that's a major.
Correct. So I guess I'm like, when you think of the differences between like a movie like Wesley Snipes' Blade and Demolition Man and Meteor Man and like the modern day Marvel movies, right?
It's very
like,
Meteor Man.
What do you think are the biggest differences? I mean,
I think there is a life and energy of those Marvel movies. Even the first Iron Man movie leaned into its premise in a way that this movie just doesn't.
Premise and comedy too. Like there's a quippiness to all these movies.
Yeah, and fun and sort of brightness. And this movie is so paint by numbers. It really, you know exactly where we're going, where we're headed. There's nothing interesting or surprising about what happens. There's no life to the world around it. Characters get introduced for no reason whatsoever. We get this guy who wrote a book about Samaritan, who's introduced
Martin
for literally
Starr
just
shows
one
up
scene.
for 5 minutes. Yeah.
Oh, don't forget. Well, okay, not just one scene. He's more than one scene, but yes. Anyway,
I mean, he's just exposition man, right?
Yes.
And there's nothing interesting about him or lively about him. There's no, I mean, the bad guys aren't fun or interesting. There's nothing. It is just bland. It is
just so bland.
To me, it's almost that 90s kind of denial of the superhero-ness. That is really, I think, from my perspective, the difference of what happened when Marvel started making movies is they went, if we're going to do this, let's do it. Let's not do it.
And let's drill down on that for a second, Jeff. What do you mean by not? In what ways does this movie not do it? Right, like just to clarify.
The hallmark of superhero films and early video game films in the same way is like, let's take this IP that worked in one medium and throw it
all away,
as much of it as we possibly can.
Oh my God.
Figure out a way to make it more like a movie instead of like the thing it was. And the first Iron Man movie went, hey, we're making an Iron Man movie. Let's make it about let's like do that instead of all the movies that had come before, which is let's desaturate, let's throw out anything that would seem weird in the real world. Let's, try to,
I guess the biggest, actually, now that you're saying it, this is very obvious, but I don't know why I didn't point it out. Like the biggest thing is most of the Marvel movies tell the story from the perspective of the superhero themselves.
Yes.
Which this movie does not do.
Not the helper kid, not somebody coming into the world, which was a staple of 90s stuff. One thing I want to point out, like there were a handful of 90s movies that tried to be the actual thing you saw in the comics, and I'm thinking of Albert Pyun's 1990 Captain America. Does anybody remember that movie, which stars J.D. Salinger's son? Or grandson, so one of those. I watched that movie a lot as a kid because I was like, "Hey, he's actually a superhero." This movie it's not a good movie, but I am a big fan of Albert Pyun's movies in general. But he had a costume. Red Skull was there, like it was kind of the thing. But the other movies you mentioned, Dave, there is a big difference between like early and mid 90s superhero movies and then like Blade. And Blade is like the marking off point, and even like Spawn. I'd include Spawn there because Spawn was like very visually inventive and was all about Spawn. But it was Blade, Spawn, and X-Men. And even though they weren't perfect, they took us to the point where we're like, oh, we can focus on superheroes. We can do superhero things. And then you get to Spider-Man, which is full on like 60s Jack Kirby style, I guess, right? Or whatever you would call like that early style. Wasn't afraid to be a comic booky. And then The Matrix was the biggest movie ever made in 1999, right? So at that point, they're like, oh yes, sure, power, superheroes, everything. This is what sells now.
Yeah,
larger than life.
Yeah,
grand scale. I mean, you see in this movie, Samaritan, everything is grounded. He punches a brick. Like that's a superhero power, is punching a brick. It's not swing through the buildings. It's not. You look at something like the 1970 Superman, the Christopher Reeve Superman, that was an anomaly. That just didn't nobody tried to replicate that for some reason. Everybody decided in the 90s that everything had to be stripped down and anti-hero and grounded and gritty, and it just was the antithesis of what we now see with the MCU and the DCU.
Yeah. There was also the idea of the stakes. I think the pendulum has occasionally swung too far in the other direction.
Yeah,
a little bit too much blue beam in sky on occasion in this new era. But I agree, the movie feels like very unimportant. Yes, like the safety of a city is at stake, but like, what is the guy's plan even? Like, he's going to destroy the power plants or whatever.
Who cares about the city? Why should I care about the city?
Who cares?
Yeah.
And to be fair, some of that's probably filming during COVID era. Like there probably was a lot of stuff they couldn't do that they wanted to do. But I thought this movie was pretty rough. Not great. You guys have made a lot of great points. I will say that seeing Sylvester Stallone not only act in this movie and be charismatic, as you said, Jeff, but actually participate in the action scenes. Like there's a bunch of action scenes where, yes, I'm sure there was copious stunt doubles and digital trickery used, but there's a lot of scenes where it looks like he actually did it. It looks like he actually swung a car door and hit a dude in the face. Like it actually looks like he did it. And that's just inherently interesting because the dude is in his 70s and he looks still really good. Doing his thing. And it's like, and I actually like a lot of the action scenes in this movie.
There was only one moment that I thought was cool, and that's when he leaps over a car and pulls it up with him to block a blast that happens.
Yeah.
I thought that was really the only memorable moment of any of the action sequences for me.
Yeah. I don't know. I like that there was a lot
There's
of
a fight where he beats up a bunch of kids. That was
yeah.
What are we doing?
But then we later find out it's okay because they're
older
teenagers.
Kids. They're teenagers. They look tiny. They look like they're
They look like half his size and weight.
Yes.
Basically.
They literally call him out for that, and it's like no, they were teenagers.
But it actually reminded me, like, it's rare to see superpowered humans go up against like normal humans these days,
because it's boring
most of the time. Think of the opening of Captain America Winter Soldier,
sure,
you know, which that was pretty cool. And there's some sequences in this movie that actually remind me of that. You have like a superpowered guy just completely annihilating these like regular dudes, and that's kind of like interesting to watch. But
that's another staple of those early superhero movies is like the idea that it's so weird to have someone with superpowers. There can really only be one in the movie. So the superpowered hero has to only fight non-superpowered people.
It's true, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I thought it was rough. Everything you guys said is right. There are no interesting choices made here, other than the stuff I said about the action. The villain is super boring. I feel really bad for this guy because he's basically played Pilu Asbeck. He was also Euron Greyjoy in Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
He basically just plays assholes that are not very interesting. And I'm sure as an actor, he's like, I'm sure as an actor, he's like very talented and he's just not getting the room to flex his abilities. But yes, it does very much feel like a 90s throwback and not in the greatest way. And especially in what I think you and I, all of us would agree, is a very crowded marketplace for superhero movies.
For sure.
You need to do a lot to distinguish yourself.
You gotta do something different.
Yeah, and this movie unfortunately does not. So,
and they thought, what if we were boring? How about just a boring gray city as old Sylvester Stallone? Like, that's all.
Let's get to spoilers for Samaritan starting right now. Well, the big twist in the movie, folks. Spoilers
it's a Billie
for
Eilish
Samaritan
song. Yeah.
It is, what'd you say?
It's a Billie Eilish. They should have just played bad guy in the background.
Yeah.
Do something interesting. Anything.
So inherently, I think it's actually kind of a cool idea.
Sure.
Yes.
Right? That it's like, oh, he was actually the bad one, and he's been trying to like atone for it during this time. But like, why did he try to atone for it?
None of that
not explained
at all in this movie.
You know, like what was his emotional journey? He seemed to have some regret when Samaritan died,
his
but like,
brother
why
died.
did he feel that way? You know, like we don't get any of that. So it's
but
just
the fact that there's this weird moment where the bad guy says, "I'm doing your plan," and he's like, "That wasn't the plan." It's like, tell me more. Tell me literally anything more about the situation there.
What is your motivation? Why do we care about any of this?
There's not enough exposition in this movie at times.
And even like there are moments where like he looks forlornly at something. He's like, ugh. Like he looks like a person who's lived with regret, but he could easily be a superhero who just failed at his job and to have that same regret. But the reveal moment where he takes off his mask to give us like young Stallone, they're twins.
Yeah.
Like that's not a dramatic moment.
I kept thinking about that. I was like, why do we need them to be twins?
They don't need to be twins. Yes. First of all, yeah.
I kept thinking that. Like, they both have masks. I mean, I guess so that they're the same age and like two sides of the same coin, I guess. But they need to be.
They don't need to be twins.
What's the coolest version of this movie, honestly, would be if they're both alive. And we get the reveal that we've been seeing different ones each time, and one of them has been living the other one's life. Like that would
be a prestige situation. Like, go prestige with this.
Yeah, or another way to do it would be they're both alive, and like the one that you think was evil is evil, and the one that you think is good, and reverse basically, and like. And the evil one became good, and the good one became evil for reasons that the movie explains. And there's tons of like
that's basically Watchmen, though.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I mean, literally anything.
Just give us something. Give us something to work with.
It is a reveal that is telegraphed from the very beginning, and so it is obvious. But I was still kind of looking forward to it because I thought something would happen as a result. and literally nothing
changes. Like, he's still fighting the same way. He
doesn't even like yell at the bad guy like, give me back my mask or anything like that. He's not, because the guy is pretending to be him, and he doesn't even seem to be offended by that or acknowledge it in any way.
Right. There's just, it feels like, I have to imagine like stuff got cut out of the movie that like goes into some of this, because this is basic storytelling rules.
Sure.
Like this is not like hard to. If the three of us schmucks can come up with it, like I bet and there is rumors of like that the production was troubled and like it feels very possible to me like this was in the script and it didn't make it into the movie, or it was in the movie and it got cut like for time. But yeah, there's like basic things that aren't in the movie that you need for the movie to be successful. Unfortunately,
I mean, there, it's a lot of other things too. I don't think the idea of a hammer forged from hatred or something.
How do you do that exactly?
How do you do that? But also, hammer? Big steel hammer. Again, we have seen that in the movie Steel. Not that exciting unless you're Thor's hammer. I don't give me something else. Anything else. There's so many other things you could be doing.
It's very funny that in a movie that is so grounded in the real world, they have a hatred hammer, a hammer forged from someone's hatred. Where in the universe of this movie, where he's like fixing watches and doing stuff, it feels like we need more of an explanation about how that happened. Because in a Marvel movie, forged from hatred, Thanos is like doing. I'm in. I get it.
The gods are
Infinity
involved.
Stones,
Something.
sure,
That's all
yes.
you need. Forged from hatred. Ooh, yeah, no, probably hatred's probably a person. I don't know. But in this movie, it feels like you're just some dude who's super strong. You forged it from hatred? How do you do?
And then the gangster who's a nobody, who's nothing, is using that hammer like kryptonite, I guess. Hammers are big. It does take a lot of work to swing them. I can't imagine even a former superhero would be like the first couple swings of that, he was just letting the guy hit him. And I was like, what are we doing here? This is what we built up to.
This gets me to my biggest problem with this movie.
Yes.
Which is, what are Samaritan's powers? Like, what? We have this entire scene, which I thought was actually pretty clever, of, hey, I generate all this heat, and so I eat ice cream to cool myself down. That's cool. That's cool. Clearly, in any other script, is a big setup, right? And yes, we do get a bit of a payoff for that at the end, but it makes... So, is he Superman, where you can shoot him and his skin is steel and it just bounces right off?
Yes.
No,
that was made very clear from the beginning that he's invulnerable.
But he's also Wolverine, because he gets hit by a car, which seems like way less of a problem than being shot multiple times. He's been shot with machine guns and not slowing down, but he gets hit by a car and he has to like Wolverine himself back to life. So is
probably the coolest scene of the movie, but also you know what to expect there. So yeah.
Well, that was a great moment when he gets hit by the car. It's very shocking, you know.
But at no point does he ever experience what he experienced by getting hit by a car again. He never experiences the need to reconstitute his body in any way.
Good Stallone impression there. And also, like, I don't think the Edie's ice cream comes back at the end, right? Like, the whole movie they're setting up that like the ice cream is going to like help him,
right?
Yeah,
right. And
it's just cooling him down, I guess. So the water is the thing, but
is the thing. Yeah,
it's like it's so unnecessarily and inconsistent, and he's doing stuff for so long before the heart thing starts to happen, and the whole thing only happens when it's the most convenient time for it to happen.
Well, he's in a giant building that's on fire with the worst CG fire I've seen in a very long time too. So I guess that you put him in an oven, then he starts to overheat. Sure.
I was talking about Javon Walton in the pre-spoiler section, and his performance really came to life for me in the final act of the movie when he's like really gets to a dark place. You know, he's like very angry and upset, and I'm like, oh, like bringing some of that euphoria energy to this, which feels much more in line with like kind of what his skill set is at this point than like,
interesting.
Hey,
he's gonna be a big emo
I'm
actor.
the young kid who's in the superhero movie, and it's like I just am not buying it. Unfortunately,
I didn't have any of that baggage because I haven't seen Euphoria, so I wasn't expecting that out of him. Did you like the child performance in this movie then? I mean, I'm loath to ever criticize a young actor. But there is, I think the direction did him no favors.
That's what I'm saying. It's the direction of he's like, and it's the direction of the casting. It's like this, you know. I don't feel like it plays into his strengths, and also The dialogue was pretty rough too.
There's a moment at the very end where Stallone gives his big rousing speech where he says, we have the good and bad inside all of us. It's how, what you make the choice. And then we cut to the kid and he goes, and it's the goofiest, like straight out of the 90s. I was like, oh, that is doing that actor no favors, because
that's what I'm saying. It's not at all the actor's fault, and I do not want to come off like we're trashing the actor in any way. Like, the actor has very little control over how they appear on screen,
Yeah.
But I do think that just like this whole movie was a mishmash of these different tones that didn't quite work well together. So, any other thoughts on Samaritan?
I don't know why this movie exists. Like, I just have so many questions. Like, I was asking myself while they were making this, like, you had so many other better decisions to make. You could have done so many more interesting things. As we were gearing up to review this movie, I was worried because we didn't hear much about it. Like, it wasn't being promoted much. It is a big new movie with Sylvester Stallone from Julius Avery, which I guess he's not a big name, but I was intrigued, and the fact that there was no promotion or anything made me worried about what it was. And ultimately, it is exactly what I was worried about. Like, it is not a terrible movie that you can make fun of. It's just kind of a middling thing that's kind of boring,
Yeah.
Well, I think that this is one of Sylvester Stallone's few movies where he plays a literal superhero.
I know, it's such a bummer that this is I want to see him. I think old Sylvester Stallone as old superhero is awesome. It's an awesome get, but
I guess basically when I'm thinking of why this movie exists, right? It exists because people like Sylvester Stallone want to be in it.
Yeah.
That's how a movie like this gets financed. And Sylvester Stallone probably was like, hey, here's an opportunity for me to be a superhero. And
he was also in Suicide Squad, right?
Yeah. He's he's going to be in He's in Guardians of the Galaxy as well, I believe, right?
Is that what it is? I thought it was Suicide.
But
he was,
and also he's
Squad.
King Shark in Suicide Squad.
Yeah.
So, but you know what I mean? Like, he's not really himself in Suicide Squad. And so this is like, he gets to be himself and be in a superhero movie. And this is an opportunity for him to do that. And actually, probably if you think of the movie through that lens, it explains a lot about why the movie is the way it is. Because this is a movie made the way Sylvester Stallone would have wanted to make it, when he was in his prime, probably.
Yeah.
So
it's much more like Demolition Man than it is like any movie out today.
Yep.
Right.
Except not as fun as
except
Man
not as
or
fun
Judge
and random
Dredd.
and weird.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So
there's world building in Demolition Man. This is
Agreed.
Granite City with trash on the ground.
Granite City.
At the end of the day, though, it is impressive that Julius Avery made a movie, and it is hard to make a movie, and even the ones we don't like, a lot of work got put into them. So that is our review of Samaritan. Thank you so much for watching this video of the Filmcast. Check out these other videos that we have available, and be sure to hit like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon to get other videos from us in the future.
You can also go to thefilmcast.com to catch all of our audio podcast versions of all of our episodes.
And support this podcast at patreon.com/filmpodcast, where you can sign up for ad-free episodes and exclusive After Darks.
Thanks so much to everyone who makes the Filmcast possible.